Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we're checking out the Protection Warrior on the Shadowlands beta for World of Warcraft. Over the last couple of days we looked at Arms and Fury Warrior, and of course we've also looked at several other classes already, and we'll be looking at every single spec and class on the Shadowlands beta over the coming few weeks. So yeah, make sure to stay tuned for all of that content coming your way. Alright, and here we are in game. So I tried this at the start of the last video and it got very positive feedback, so we're going to try this again with Protection Warrior, which is we're going to look at the core rotation, the core gameplay of the spec, as sort of like a quick refresher for people in terms of what the Prot Warrior actually does. And especially for people that maybe are looking at picking this class up, this spec up for the first time, or haven't played the game in a little while and aren't all that familiar with what it actually does at its core. Okay, so Protection Warrior, it's a little more complicated than the first class we covered, which was the Fury Warrior. So obviously we still have like charge and all of that. Now the big thing with Prot Warrior is we're going to be generating rage. You generate rage a small bit passively through our attacks, and we also generate a small bit passively through taking damage. And rage is going to fuel your active mitigation, your core survivability. How do we generate rage? Well, our core way of generating rage, one of the core ways, is Shield Slam. This has about an 8-second cooldown. Slam the target for about 700 damage. Bam. And this, reduced by armor, of course, it's physical damage. And this generates 15 rage. And then our other abilities, Devastate, Thunderclap, Revenge, and Execute, they all have a 30% chance to reset the cooldown on Shield Slam. So let's see if we can get, there we go, we actually got a reset first time, so nice, with Devastate. Okay, cool, so that's like one of your main rage generators. Our other core sort of rage generator is Thunderclap. This has about a 5.3 second cooldown. Blast all enemies within 8 yards for 300 physical damage, reduce their move speed by 20% for 10 seconds, and do reduced damage to secondary targets, generating 5 rage. So this is like your AoE sort of filler ability. Suppress this on cooldown. It's a small bit of rage, and it's some AoE threat. Has been nerfed down though since BFA, so do bear that in mind. Then our other filler, Devastate, this doesn't generate any rage at all. This just does about 250 physical damage. This is purely fishing, pretty much. I mean, it's some single target damage, better than pressing nothing. And fishing for resets on Shield Slam. So there you go. Those are sort of the core 3 abilities of your sort of rotation. But what are they building up for? They're building up rage for your active mitigation. So we have 3 ways to spend, actually 4 ways now to spend rage. The most important 2 are Shield Block and Ignore Pain. So Shield Block, you have 2 charges on a 14-second recharge. Raise your shield, and this will block all melee attacks against you for 6 seconds. These blocks can be critical blocks, critical block being our mastery, where you can block twice as much damage, but kind of nice, right? And also Shield Slam does do more damage while Shield Block is active, which is kind of a nice benefit. And this does cost 30 rage. But yeah, so, you know, managing your charges and choosing when to put up your Shield Block is going to be one of the most important decisions you can make for big incoming physical damage. Then our other big rage spender is Ignore Pain. This costs 40 rage. Instant cast. Fight through the pain, ignoring 50% of damage taken, up to 2,500 total damage prevented. You can actually stack this up a couple of times. For example, like we can stack this up right now to 4,000. So yeah, this is like, you know, you're going to be spamming any excess rage you get. Obviously, you can only spend so much on shield blocks. It's limited by charges. But Ignore Pain is sort of an unlimited rage spender to boost your survivability. We also have a couple of things that do damage for rage. First up, we have Revenge. This now costs 20 rage in Shadowlands, and this is just an swing in a wide arc in front of you, doing 540 physical damage to all enemies in front of you with reduced damage to secondary targets. So it's pretty straightforward. It's just a very small AoE cleave attack. Now, interestingly for this, of course, your successful dodges and parries have a chance to make your next Revenge cost no rage. So for the most part in fights, that is typically how you're going to be using Revenge. It's when you get the proc that makes it free. You're typically going to be spending your rage more so in Ignore Pain for survivability, but this is a good option when you simply want more damage, more threat, and don't really need the extra survivability. Also worth noting that new in Shadowlands, there is Execute for the Prot Warrior, which you can spend 20 to 40 rage to do substantial single target damage, but only on enemies with less than 20% health. So that's a big increase to your damage, really good for questing and stuff like that. So just bear that in mind, that is there. Right, that's the core rotation. You also have several big defensive cooldowns, so I'll just point those out. Well, first of all, Spell Reflection. Reflect a spell back at you, reduce magical damage taken by 20%, lasts 5 seconds or until a spell is reflected. So that's one. That's nice, obviously really powerful in pretty much any situation. Lots of plays you can make with that. Avatar is like a DPS cooldown, generates 30 rage on a 1.5 minute cooldown. Become a Colossus for 20 seconds. You do 20% increased damage, and it removes all roots and snares. So Avatar, just do more damage and generate a bit of rage. Then for the more substantial defensive CDs, Demoralizing Shout is our weakest one. This is instant cast, 45-second cooldown. Demoralizes all enemies within 10 yards, reducing the damage they deal to you by 20% for 8 seconds. So you have Demo Shout. We have Last Stand, 3-minute cooldown. Increases maximum health by 30% for 15 seconds and instantly heals you for that amount. We have Shield Wall as well then. Reduces all damage you take by 40% for 8 seconds on a 4-minute cooldown. So our biggest damage reduction cooldown, but on the biggest cooldown and a relatively short-ish duration. So yeah, there's a couple of other bits here to your sort of crowd control kit. First up, Shockwave, which is an AoE stun in front of you on a 40-second cooldown. And then Intimidating Shout, which is an AoE fear on a 1.5 minute cooldown. So there's some of the utilities. So they're sort of the core parts of playing tank. You've got like Heroic Throw, which is low damage spammable ranged attack for grabbing some threat. That causes high threat. So for some of that stuff. So yeah, that's sort of the core bit of playing the Prot Warrior. So you're gonna charge into the fight. You're gonna shield slam. We're gonna make sure that we have our abilities rolling here. We can fill in with Devastate. Shield block's gonna drop. Let's throw that back up. Shield slam. We're going to do our Thunderclap. Got a Shield Slam reset. Go again. We'll refresh, ignore pain. We're going to spam our Devastates. There's a Thunderclap. Let's go. Another Devastate. Shield Slam. Okay. Let's say there's big damage thing coming in. We're going to Shield Block. Make sure that's up. All right. And then you're going to weave in your defensive cooldowns to, answer the core threats as they appear. So, yeah, that's sort of the Prot Warrior, what you're doing. Relatively straightforward spec. Obviously, with all those cooldowns and stuff, it's a lot of buttons. But yeah, choose the big defensive cooldown for the job, and sort of manage your shield block charges with all that rage you're getting. There you go. In terms of the core changes to Protection Warrior, there's been quite a few, and unfortunately, quite a few of these are nerfs to your spec. But first, before we look at those very quickly, you do have some new leveling perks in Shadowlands at levels 52, 54, 56 and 58. You're going to get some nice benefits, so at least that's good. Let's start with a bit of good news. The first one I already have actually is level 52, and that's Avatar will generate an additional 10 rage. So whereas before it was generating 20 rage, now it's going to generate 30 rage. So not a massive deal, but certainly quite nice, especially going into a big pull to have more rage to have at your disposal on pull start, which is cool. Level 54, this one's quite nice. Challenging Shout. 4-minute cooldown, instant cast, taunt all enemies within 10 yards to attack you for 6 seconds. I think this one is really wonderful for Protection Warrior, of course. An AoE taunt, that's fantastic. Very good on skittish weeks. And unfortunately, we're going to cover the nerfs in a second, but coming from the end of BFA, you're probably going, AoE threat? No problem for me. No problem at all. Unfortunately, it probably will be in Shadowlands, so having Challenging Shout could turn out to be quite useful in some circumstances. At level 56, you'll get Rallying Cry rank 2, which increases the additional temporary and maximum health bonuses of Rallying Cry by 5% more. So instead of boosting your party and raids health for 10 seconds by 15%, it's going to boost it up by 20%. So that's a nice little perk. And finally, at level 58, you're going to get Shield Wall rank 2, reducing damage taken by an additional 10% for Shield Wall, bringing that up to a 50% damage reduction for 8 seconds, which is, yeah, what's not to like there? It's a really big perk. You're going to feel very safe while you're within your Shield Wall. Okay, now, in terms of those nerfs that I was talking about, let me try to make sure that I cover all of them here. Some of them are to the talents. We'll come to those in a second. But to your baseline stuff, that's always going to affect you. Okay, first up, Thunderclap now does less damage than before, and as you can see, it does reduce damage to secondary targets. So not only is it just baseline doing less damage, but its AoE damage is further nerfed. So that's quite a big nerf. Okay, we also have yes, Revenge, or other sort of AoE tool here. On BFA, this costs 30 rage. Now on Shadowlands, this is number one, it costs 20 rage, so that's a positive thing. And the damage has actually been increased. However, It will do reduced damage to secondary targets now, so sort of a bit of target capping going in there. More importantly, this used to proc every time you dodged or parried an attack. You would get a free cast of Revenge, that proc. This now only has a chance to proc. I think apparently it works out to be roughly 3 procs a minute or something like that, is what I've heard. So I haven't like timed it and tested it myself in that much detail, but that's what I've heard. You can probably check from the footage if that's how often that it does proc up. But yeah, that's going to mean that Revenge is going to proc a lot less often. And you can sort of spam it a bit more in your rotation, I suppose, if you have that rage to spare. But generally speaking, those free procs of Revenge are going to happen much less often. So nerf to AoE. Then the third baseline nerf, I mean, this one I think is a bit more questionable whether it's a nerf or not. But Intervene has now been separated from Charge. They are each their own unique ability now. So whereas they were both the same button and you could choose, I think, what to use it on in BFA, now they're totally separate. So Charge is an offensive charge on a 20-second cooldown. And Intervene is now a 30-second cooldown charge to an ally target. Now, interestingly enough, when you charge to an ally target, you intercept all melee and all ranged attacks against them for 6 seconds while they remain within 10 yards. So that's definitely a new use of the ability, which I actually think is pretty cool. And I think that this is something of a buff. 6 seconds of blocking all melee attacks against a target, that actually lines up very, very well with shield block. So I think that's kind of enjoyable in the sense that, like if you're in a raid situation and you tank swap and your other tank buddy is in a bit of trouble, like they're in a high damage situation, like you can totally intervene them and shield block and cover all of those attacks coming at them with your shield block. That's kind of a cool little thing that you could potentially do. Or again, protecting like your healer or one of your melee DPS or something that's in danger in Mythic Plus. I think that's kind of nifty. So yeah, intervene. I think there's pros and cons to this, but sort of separating the two out, I don't know. Like I feel like it's sort of a little beginner friendly as well. It's like you get how to use Charge, and it sort of encourages you to think a bit more about Intervene too. Bad news, of course, is that by separating these and all of that, it is sort of a nerf to your mobility total, etc. Like Intervene has a longer cooldown, but yeah, that's just something to bear in mind. Sort of a nerf, a little bit of a buff. There's a bit of a balancing act going on there. There are also even more new abilities coming to the Protection Warrior. First up, we have a very interesting one, which is Execute. Execute is now there for protection, and this one is actually great. So it costs 20 to 40 rage. I can't show it to you in a target dummy, unfortunately. But it will do up to about 1,900 physical damage based on the rage spent. Of course, you can only use it on enemies that are below 20% health. And if your foe survives, 20% of the rage spent is refunded. I mean, considering that Shield Slam is doing 700 physical damage, hitting something for 1,900, this hits really bloody hard. So this feels fantastic for being out in the world, doing world content as Prot Warrior. And this is going to be really nice. Again, this is going to, I think it adds another layer, like in raids, especially when you're off tanking. Rather than going like, I'm generating all this rage, I guess I could dump it on Revenge, but that feels kind of bad. At least in Execute windows, when you're off tanking, you can now dump it into Execute and really contribute a lot of damage, which is quite cool. Or again, like if you're in Execute windows, this is going to be a great way to dump your rage if you don't need it for Ignore Pain. If you don't need that survivability, that's an awful lot more damage that you can add and throw out. So definitely an intriguing and pretty cool perk to come in. Next up, we have Whirlwind. This one is a bit more questionable. This costs 30 rage, instant. You Whirlwind, striking up to 5 nearby targets for 390 physical damage. So you charge in. There it is, Whirlwind. So this is an odd one. Obviously 30 rage. I guess like it goes all around you, so that's kind of nice. But compared to Revenge, which does 540 damage to all enemies in front of you, with reduced damage to secondary targets for sure. But nonetheless, Revenge only costs 20 rage, whereas Whirlwind costs 30 rage for a bit less damage. So I don't know, like there may be some niche uses for this, but I think generally speaking, you're more likely to just be using Revenge. Hamstring is coming to the Prot Warrior. This costs 10 rage. You maim an enemy for 100 physical damage, so very low damage, but you reduce their movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. So again, this is a nice little tool to add to the Prot Warrior toolkit. This will certainly help your kiting game, right? I mean, the debuff's actually pretty long, so even in a situation where I'm fighting like 3 tough mobs, like let's say I've got 3 tough mobs, I know that they're going to enrage in a second here, and they're going to start doing like double damage to me. Okay, well, I can hamstring all 3 of them and then, you know, run away and sort of kite them with that movement speed reduction thing. So I think this is a really nifty tool to have. Yeah, it's a great one to add into your toolkit. It's a much stronger slow than the Thunderclap, obviously, and a long duration. So a very positive little perk that you can make some nice skill plays around. And then the final one, Shattering Throw. This is a big utility ability. 3-minute cooldown, 30-yard range, 1.5-second cast. This one will hurl your weapon at the enemy, causing 700 physical damage, ignoring armor, and removing any magical immunities. This also does up to 500 increased damage to absorb shields. So, I mean, even straight up, like, this does quite a bit of damage. Like, for a prot warrior, this is doing as much damage as a shield slam, except it's at range, and of course it ignores armor. So it'll actually do more damage than shield slam, which is kind of nice, right? Like, it does 700 damage against this. Shield Slam does 490, so I mean, it does quite a chunk of damage at range. So that could, you know, it does have some usefulness, I actually do think, in terms of, you know, starting off the fight or getting a bit of threat at range, which is kind of funny. But more importantly, of course, what you're mostly going to use this for is the utility. It has some PvP usage, so if you're one of those horrible people that run tanks in Eye of the Storm and Raided Battlegrounds, for example, this is going to be great. You can remove Divine Shields and Ice Blocks with this, for example. And more so for PvE, there may be some niche uses for that, or the big damage that it does to absorb shields. That's going to be potentially, in some fights, that could be a very, very nice option to do lots of damage. In terms of the talent tree for the Prot Warrior, you're going to see there's an awful lot of changes here. So let's just go through them like sort of sequentially, one by one, to break it down. Starting off in level 15, we got some new talents, right? So War Machine. Your auto attacks generate 50% more rage, and killing an enemy will instantly generate 10 rage and increase your movement speed by 30% for 8 seconds. So this is like it's a nice one for sort of solo content and world questing and smaller group stuff. It's intriguing. We'll see if that actually ends up being good. Punish, I believe, is still the same. And then Impending Victory. This has been buffed again for all the warrior specs. So this, the 30-second cooldown, the 10 rage cost, replacing Victory Rush. It heals you for 30% of your maximum health, and obviously killing enemy that yields experience or honor will reset the cooldown. So that's a nice little bit of self-healing that you can talent into kind of reliably, which is quite nice, I think, seeing as the Prot Warrior doesn't have any self-healing. Now, you've got self-shielding, but this is, you know, more self-healing. Definitely feels pretty good. At level 25 then, Double Time is here. This passive, it increases the number of charges on charge by 1, and it also reduces the cooldown of charge by 3 seconds. So you got a pretty big decision to make at level 25. Do I want, you know, more charges, which is obviously going to be very useful for that mobility and picking up mob packs and zipping around more, or do I want Rumbling Earth, so more cooldown reduction on my AoE stun, or Stormbolt for that single target stun? That's a tough decision. It's a big decision, so that's one you'll have to make. At level 30, quite a few changes here. Best Served Cold, I believe, is still the same, but of course, Revenge now costs less rage and does more damage, but the procs trigger much less frequently. And because of that, that's really going to change the value of Best Served Cold. I'm not sure if it's going to be worth it or not, but just bear that in mind. Essentially, this is, you do, generally speaking, more AoE damage at a relatively steady rate. Devastator is here as well. So Devastator is like more consistent single target damage and Shield Slam reset, so even more single target. Or Dragon's Roar. Dragon's Roar doesn't slow, but for Prot Warrior, it obviously generates 10 rage. It does 3 times as much damage if it critically strikes, and it has a 30-second cooldown. So yeah, level 30 is going single target damage, more consistent AoE damage, or big chunk of AoE damage every 30 seconds. That's your choice. Level 35, Crackling Thunder, Bounding Stride, I believe are still unchanged. Menace, though, this one's cool. Intimidating Shout will knock back all nearby enemies except your primary target and cause them to cower in fear for 15 seconds instead of fleeing. So that's really, really nice. Like, I think that's just super awesome. If I show you like the old Intimidating Shout, yeah, like enemies running away, and that only actually lasts for 8 seconds. Menace makes it last for 15, so that's really cool. That's a long CC there for Mythic Plus in particular. And of course, obviously in a dungeon situation, you know, enemies running away, there's an awful lot of risk associated with that, because if they run away and pull another mob pack, you're in an awful lot of trouble. Having them just stand there, be scared, is much better. I'm kind of interested as well to see whether the knockback will have any particular effect. Certainly knocking them back if they're immune to the fear The knockback should still interrupt them, which is cool. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of cool stuff happening here with Menace. That's going to make Intimidating Shout a really attractive option for Mythic Plus, so that's pretty awesome to see. The level 40 row has seen quite a few changes here. Never Surrender, I believe, is still the same. Ignore Pain will prevent more damage based on missing health. Bolster has been tweaked. So Last Stand's cooldown's reduced by 1 minute, and it grants you the shield block effect for its duration. So that brings Last Stand from 3 minute to 2 minute cooldown. I believe in BFA this just made you block all attacks. Now it gives you shield block instead. So shield block, still you block all attacks. But they can also be critical blocks, and they can increase Shield Slam's damage by 30% while it's active. So that's kind of nifty. And obviously it's going to let you, recharge your charges of Shield Block. You can add those on to the bolster thing. It's kind of like just a free, it's a free 15-second Shield Block, which is cool. There is a bit of a nerf to the talent in the sense that Anger Management no longer reduces the cooldown of Last Stand. So this is, it's purely that 2 minute cooldown with bolster, but it's still a good cooldown. So yeah, that is your option there. Indomitable then. This is new, I think, or it's a returning talent that's been changed several times. Your maximum health is increased by 10%, and every 10 rage you spend heals you for 1% of your maximum health. So this one is quite intriguing. So just a flat 10% max health bonus is always nice. And then sort of a bit of self-healing just gradually trickling in is pretty cool as well. Like if you consume, like Ignore Pain with 40 rage, that's going to heal you for 4% max health every time you press the button. So yeah, definitely an intriguing option. So yeah, you've got, again, the choice here at level 40, Bolster for the, make my Last Stand cooldown, make the big cooldown much stronger. Indomitable for that very consistent, healthier level, or Never Surrender for more frequent emergency healing with Ignore Pain. So an interesting choice, I think, anyway. We'll see how the balance works out, of course, on all of these. Level 45, here we go. The most controversial row, I would say. Into the Fray has been nerfed. You gain haste for each enemy or ally within 10 yards up to 10%. Booming Voice, Demoralizing Shout, also generates 40 rage and increases the damage you deal to affected targets by 20%. And Unstoppable Force, with Avatar increasing the damage of Thunderclap by 30% and reducing the cooldown by 50%. So, in BFA, why was Warrior, why was Warrior, or some of the reasons that Prot Warrior, was so crazy overpowered, and it was overpowered in patch 8.3 here at the end of BFA. So if you're playing on live servers right now, why are you the best tank in Mythic Plus by quite a substantial margin? A part of it was that these 3 talents were on separate talent tiers, so you could choose all 3 of these. And then you also had your Azurite traits and essences and all of that stuff going in on top of it, like you could proc Avatar randomly and stuff like that. And Shield Slam, but Thunderclap obviously was doing more damage then as well in BFA compared to the nerfed version of Thunderclap we have now on Shadowlands. And yeah, also Thunderclap would increase the duration of your Demoralizing Shout. I mean, all this stuff just, it all piled in on top of each other. And it left the Prot Warrior as this spec that would just pump out just tons of AoE damage, would generate tons of rage, tons of survivability, and get tons of cooldown reduction on its big cooldowns as well. It was just insanely good. Had just crazy powerful mitigation, the best AoE damage of any tank. It was nutty. So this is a massive nerf, obviously, for the Warrior to put all of these in on the same talent row. That build has been, and again, with the Azurite traits being gone, that build has been very much sort of truncated and nerfed. So that's definitely going to be a pity if you, because no doubt you were enjoying being overpowered. I know that our Warrior tank in the guild, he's not happy about this. Yeah, like at the end of the day, level 45 row now becomes just passively more haste. Your short cooldown is going to, again, be a little bit more powerful, or your sort of big damaging cooldown Avatar is going to be more powerful. So I think that it actually does make sense as a talent row. You've got the constant bonus, the short cooldown bonus, or then the bigger cooldown bonus. You got to make that decision. I think it does make sense. And yeah, in my opinion, like at least the Prot Warrior, it certainly was overpowered in 8.3. So you have to expect those nerfs, right? you got, as a Prot Warrior, you got to be predicting incoming damage to you. You got to predict those incoming nerfs, and you got to shield block your heart and power on through. So anyway, Big nerf, though. For your final row of talents, then, again, we have some sort of bad news and also some really good news. So we'll end on a good note here, at least. Heavy repercussions, though, that's still the same. Of course, this is more appealing, I think, at the start of the expansion, right? Because it extends the duration of shield block whenever you shield slam. Obviously, shield block uptime is going to be a lot lower at the start of the expansion with less haste, so that's always nice. Anchor management has been nerfed. This now only reduces the cooldown of Avatar and Shield Wall, so it no longer reduces the cooldown of Demoralizing Shout or of Last Stand. Again, sort of nerfing those talents, and yeah, again, it was very, very overpowered, so there you go. But nerf aside, we have one bit of really, really good news for you guys, which is Ravager. 45-second cooldown. Nice. Throw a whirling weapon at the target location that chases nearby enemies, inflicting 1,800 physical damage on up to 8 enemies over 10.7 seconds. And it generates 10 rage each time it deals damage. This is so damn good. This is amazing. So you can like throw this in. It's just going to spin around. It's going to do loads of damage in AoE. Absolutely tons. And yeah, give you lots and lots of rage to play with as well. This is incredibly good, guys. This is so damn good. See there, it's going to give me 50 rage, right? It's going to take those 5 times, give me 50 rage. But yeah, I mean, hitting up to 8 enemies, it's like a Thunderclap, for example, is doing 300 physical damage. This is doing 1,800. So that's equal to, what's that? That's 6. It's like 6 Thunderclaps worth of damage on that one button. It's so nice. And obviously all that rage generation as well. And on a 45-second cooldown only. So you're going to have this up all the time. It's a massive chunk of AoE damage that's boosting your survivability too. So this is going to be a really, really big perk. And obviously it's ranged as well. Like you can throw it in at range, which is really cool. So yeah, this is a phenomenal ability. This is really welcome, I think, to the Prot Warrior toolkit. Yeah, a really fun one to have. Just amazing. Everything about this is amazing. Literally everything. So like I said, at least there is one shining bit of good news at the very end of our talent look here to sort of make up for some of these other changes, which I think there are some positive changes in the talent tree, but certainly there's a lot of nerfs here, that's for sure, to sort of deconstruct the overpowered builds and stuff that were there. So yeah, probably for an active Prot Warrior, you're going to have a lot of bad news, but at least we got one bit of good news. And there you go. That's the talent tree. For your soulbinds as a protection warrior, there are, of course, 3 different types of soulbinds. Endurance, which increase survivability. Finesse, which increase utility. And potency, which are, generally speaking, going to increase your damage. And they're going to slot into your soulbind trees. There should be an example here in the background so you get a feel for sort of the routes you can take through the trees and how many of each slot you can get. For the endurance conduits, these are probably the most important one for the Prot Warrior. First up there is Iron Maiden. Revenge has a 4% chance to refund a charge of shield block, and again that that chance can increase as you get higher level conduits. So that's very good. More uptime on your central part of active mitigation. That's phenomenal. Indelible Victory gives Impending Victory or Victory Rush a heal for 400% of the damage it dealt over 8 seconds. This is relatively weak for protection compared to for arms or for fury. Yeah, I mean, that's just a very small amount of healing on a tank spec. Not going to add up to too much, I don't think. Stalwart Guardian, for protection, will reduce the cooldown, though, of Shield Wall by 40 seconds. And again, this can scale up even higher. So Shield Wall being your biggest defensive, going to be 50% damage reduction for 8 seconds here in Shadowlands. That is a very nice bonus. And then finally, we have right now, the final one for now. There should be more coming soon. But there is Brutal Vitality, where 6% of the damage you deal will add to your active Ignore Pain. Again, that can scale up. It looks like it scales up to about 12%. So that's really nice. Definitely a fun one where damage cooldowns can sort of play in that small way to adding to your survivability. So yeah, that seems like it's going to be pretty nifty. For the Finesse Conduits, the first one is Cacophonous Roar. Intimidating Shout can withstand 80% more damage before breaking. That one is really phenomenal, especially for Protection Warrior with the Menace talent, where it can last up to 15 seconds and enemies will just be feared in place. That's going to be so good. You know, withstanding more damage, I mean, they're just standing there, so there's no downside to it with the Menace talent. Disturb the Peace then, for protection, reduce the cooldown of Shockwave by 5 seconds. And again, that can scale up to, looks like, about 15 seconds cooldown reduction. So that's incredibly good as well. just adding to that AoE control. So super welcome for protection. Inspiring Presence will increase Rallying Cry's duration and health bonus by 20%. So this could be pretty good for helping out your raid, so particularly useful in a raid situation. I suspect you probably want the more crowd control focused stuff in smaller group content. And then finally, for the Finesse Conduits so far, Safeguard. Intervene will reduce damage taken by the target by 10%, and that can scale up to 24%. So that could be, again, really phenomenal. You could potentially, again, in the raids, in a 2-tank situation where there's big tank downtime, that could potentially turn Intervene into a really substantial external that you could use to help out the other tank. That could potentially work really well, so one to keep an eye on for sure. For the Potency Conduits, there's not too many here for the Protection Warrior, seeing as you're much more focused on Endurance Conduits compared to a DPS class, but there are two. The first one is Unnerving Focus. Last Stand will increase your rage generation by 30%. And again, that looks like it can scale up to 75%, which seems insanely good. So that's a ton of extra survivability coming in during your last stand into those into Ignore Pains. And definitely if you take the Bolster talent, where Last Stand is going to give you permanent shield block while it's up, basically, yeah, that could just, you could be super tanky, just absolutely churning out the Ignore Pains during Last Stand, not having to worry about shield block. So very intriguing conduit there. And then Show of Force. Revenge increases the damage of your next Thunderclap by 20%. To me, this one, you know, obviously this is good, but it definitely feels a little bad considering that both of those abilities have been nerfed coming into BFA. I suspect that even with this conduit, they're both still going to be weaker than before. So yeah, that feels a little bit bad, but at least it's something, I suppose. For your legendaries for the Protection Warrior, first up we have 4 General Warrior legendaries, which are there for all the warrior specs, and then we'll take a look at 4 that are specific for protection. First up we have Leaper. Heroic Leap gains 2 additional charges. This could potentially be fantastic for extra mobility. You could do some really cool stuff potentially in Mythic Plus with some interesting pulls and things like that. So one to keep an eye on, although you'll probably want something that's going to up your defenses more at the start of the expansion where you can only equip 1 legendary, but we'll keep an eye on it. Next up, Misshapen Mirror. Spell Reflection lasts 200% longer and applies to your party. So this is absolutely insanely good. You could do some really crazy things with this. I mean, if it's not spells that can be reflected, then that is just straight up a 20% magic damage resist for 15 seconds on your party. So that's amazing. If it does reflect spells, there's lots of plays that you could make with this in Mythic Plus or PvP, reflecting specific things, especially if you've got mobs that cast on random players, or if you've got classes that could potentially taunt a spell for you. So kind of intriguing one there. Misshapen Mirror, lots of potential. Seismic Reverberation. If Revenge hits 3 or more enemies, it hits them 1 additional time. This seems pretty good for just some consistent AoE damage. Much better for Prot, it looks like, than for the other 2 specs, because Revenge is more significant than Whirlwind is for them. So yeah, an interesting one there. We'll see how the tuning works out with the reduced damage to secondary targets, whether or not it will be worth it. We shall see. And then we have Signet of Tormented Kings. Activating Avatar will randomly cast either Bladestorm or Recklessness at reduced effectiveness. So this one is this one's a little spooky. Like Recklessness, that's a good one to get, you know, more crit chance, that's fine, that's pretty good, and possibly more rage generation, won't say no to that. Bladestorm though, that one is a little more tricky, but I think this could actually work out to be relatively good. We'll see. I mean, it's just a bunch of AoE damage, and obviously Bladestorm also generates some rage. You do lose control of your character in the sense that you can still use defensive abilities, and you can still, you know, block and dodge and parry and stuff like that, I'm pretty sure. But you obviously can't use shield slam and stuff like that. I think it could be pretty good. Like, I think this one could be kind of nice. It just depends on whether Bladestorm is going to screw up your rotation too much. If it does that, then it could be bad, but if you can get away with it, then I think this could be pretty cool. So next up we have the 4 Protection Warrior specific legendaries here. The first one is Reprisal. This works with Intervene. The first intercepted attack that you get with Intervene will grant you Ignore Pain and make your next revenge cost no rage. So I think this one is really nice, actually. This is going to have some really interesting utility and usage in Mythic Plus, or again in raids with some 2-tank scenarios. More so in Mythic Plus against fixating mobs, so it's not going to be that good in every dungeon, but in dungeons like if you imagine the Underrot with the Blood Swarmers, right? Those little spidery type dudes that would fixate on a party member and just do massive physical damage to that party member. Super cool if with your Intervene you can just dash over, get that free Ignore Pain and free Revenge for some AoE damage. That's going to be phenomenal. So a very interesting one there, I think, though very situational. Next up, we have The Wall. Shield Slam generates an additional 2 rage and reduces the remaining cooldown of Shield Wall by 4 seconds. So, I mean, pretty straightforward. A bit more rage is going to feel pretty good, and definitely getting up more shield walls is going to be pretty nifty. So, yeah, not much to complain about there. It's not the most exciting thing in the world, but it's also a pretty solid bonus. Thunderlord then. Each enemy you hit with Thunderclap reduces the remaining cooldown on Demoralizing Shout by 3 seconds. This one is really awesome for AoE. Obviously, it's got to feel a little bit bad in the sense that they've sort of nerfed the Thunderclap build and the Demoralizing Shout build, but this is such a phenomenal bonus. Demoralizing Shout's a very short cooldown, so you're going to get really good uptime on this. Constantly be able to throw out those Demoralizing Shouts while you're in AoE in dungeons. And of course, you do have synergies with like Thunderclap talents and with Demoralizing Shout talents and stuff, so can switch up your build. Definitely a potent one for sure. Finally then, Unbreakable Will. Your Shield Wall ability now grants half of its effect to all party members. This one is also very interesting, quite niche but very interesting. So Shield Wall is a 50% damage reduction. So as well as giving you 50% damage reduction, that's giving your whole party 25% damage reduction as well. So again, if you think about Underrot and you think about Kragmaw, for example, that could be pretty tough, you know, to get through. There's a big healing check there where you just massive party-wide damage. So this Unbreakable Will could be extremely potent. I mean, again, some people don't like playing with these sort of supportive type things. For me, I think that they're really cool, being able not only to benefit yourself, but your party members. I think that's awesome. So again, like in situations where there's lots of party-wide damage going out, you can use your shield wall as not only helping yourself, but helping your party too. So yeah, kind of a nice buff there for sure. Looking at the Covenant powers, and we're going to start off with the Kyrians. Their signature ability is Summon Steward. Your Steward will come in. He'll give you essentially a health stone type thing called a File of Serenity. It has 3 charges. This restores 15% of your health and removes all curses, diseases, poisons, and bleed effects on you. So a pretty fantastic utility thing. I mean, whenever those effects are on you, and especially when they're dangerous, this is going to be a really stellar ability for survivability. So awesome stuff. And then their Covenant ability for the warrior is Spear of Bastion, and this one is amazing. You throw a Kyrian spear at the target location, doing 200% attack power arcane damage, and doing an additional 216% attack power damage over 4 seconds. This is arcane damage, so it bypasses armor, so this does a ton of damage in AoE. It generates 25 rage, and it also tethers enemies hit by the spear to the location. Now the AoE is quite small. It's about an 8-yard range AoE, so it's pretty small, but I mean, this ability is so good, does so much damage. Tethering enemies in to that spear location, that's really cool utility to bring to Mythic Plus. You know, you could use it to like lock enemies in place and you run away and kite them, or just keep enemies grouped up for AoE, all sorts of things, stop them dashing away, what have you. Like, there's so many different uses for this. The rage generation is fantastic as well. That feeds in directly to either some damage or most likely to some survivability. And it has only a 1-minute cooldown, so this is one of the best Covenant abilities in the whole game. Just feels so good, so useful in so many situations. Does pretty much everything well, does multiple things well, so a big standout one there. The Soulbind Conduit, by the way, for the Spear of Bastion is called Piercing Verdict, and this is a conduit that increases the damage and rage generation of Spear of Bastion by 20%. So again, all good stuff, you know, more AoE damage, more AoE threat, and more rage generation. Yep, that's going to be a really good conduit that quite likely you could be looking to pick up. For the Venthyr then, their signature ability is Door of Shadows. This is a 1-minute cooldown, 1.5 second cast, 35-yard range teleport. Just point and click where you want to go, do the cast time, and you teleport over there. So pretty nifty, right? You can skip certain packs in Mythic Plus potentially. You can avoid, you know, like if there's a big pool of lava on the ground, you could just teleport over that lava, which is nice. So definitely there's some plays to be made with this. I don't believe that you can block or parry during the cast time, and you probably get some knockback while being hit and stuff. So a little bit awkward in that sense to use as the Protection Warrior, but it's still a decent one for some extra mobility. So one to keep an eye on. Their ability then for the Covenant, for Warriors, is insane. It's called Condemn. This replaces Execute, makes Execute do shadow damage, so Execute will do way more damage, and you'll be able to use this on enemies above 80% health as well as below 20% health. So you can use this on pull, which is pretty cool, or on like full health mobs, which is pretty nice. It's also going to weaken the target, and it's going to prevent some of the damage that they're going to deal to you. Right, the interesting thing about this is that it makes Execute fit into your rotation as a Prot Warrior much more naturally, because instead of simply being something to spend Rage on for massive damage, it now also has a defensive benefit in single target, which is really, really big. So again, in single target fights, this is going to be very, very powerful, like especially against bosses that get stronger when they're about to die, like big boss burn phases, or bosses that are particularly dangerous on pull. Yeah, or like packs where you've got a really strong mob, you can get that condemn out on them. It's certainly interesting. I mean, it will definitely require more testing to see how well this actually flows with the Protection Warrior. Is it going to work well? How does it compare to spending that Rage on Ignore Pain instead? But I think it's definitely a very, very appealing one that stands out in single target scenarios. The conduit for this is called Harrowing Punishment, which increases Condemn's damage dealt and the damage prevention by 8% for each nearby enemy, going up to 40%. The big appeal would be, let's say we pull a pack in Mythic Plus and it's the Captain of the Guard and 4 Guardsmen, in which case obviously the Captain of the Guard, he's, you know, twice as strong as the other guys. The other guys are like small little trash mobs, they don't do too much. Harrowing Punishment makes Condemn very appealing there, where you can focus those Condemns in on the Captain of the Guard, get really good single target damage reduction on the one guy that's actually doing damage, and you're not too worried about those little trash enemies. There's just sort of powering up your Condemn ability. So that could be very cool. And that one, I think that conduit again makes this Covenant ability especially appealing for the Protection Warrior. Necrolords are next. Their signature ability is Fleshcraft. You channel for 4 seconds with a 2-minute cooldown, and you will form a shield for up to 20% of your maximum health by doing that channel. If you channel near corpses, you can claim their essence to grow the shield. The shield can get as big as 50% of your maximum health. This is, again, it's not fantastic for the Protection Warrior. Like, it's okay. I mean, you can't block or parry or dodge or anything while you're channeling, so the defensive benefit is a little bit questionable. And of course, you're not spamming Devastate and getting your Shield Slam reset. So I feel like this one could be relatively awkward to use in combat. You know, certainly, I guess, for some kiting strategies, like, you know, you could jump away and channel Fleshcraft, and that might be okay while the mobs are coming to you. So I'm sure that creative warriors will find uses for this, or you could certainly channel it between mob packs and start off like difficult mob pulls with a big shield, and that could be quite nice. So it's certainly one to consider, though difficult to use in combat, I think. The Warrior Covenant ability is called Conqueror's Banner. You brandish the banner of the Necrolords for 2 minutes, increasing your movement speed by 10% and causing your shield slam to grant you glory. Killing an enemy grants 2 stacks of glory. You can reactivate the ability to plant the banner in the ground, granting 20% maximum health and 50% attack speed to you and 4 allies within 15 yards of the banner, and that lasts 2 seconds per glory, up to 30 seconds. And the banner itself has a 2-minute cooldown. So this is a big supportive ability. It's certainly intriguing. I do feel like I'm not as pushed to take this as a Protection Warrior as the other ones, which are gonna like really up my, you know, my utility in terms of the dungeon and my mob control. This one's just gonna like boost up my team and protect my team. Again, this could be very strong in certain circumstances, like in a raid fight or again in a Mythic Plus dungeon. When you're in those situations where there's lots of damage coming out on your team, that's going to be awesome to have this banner. Or again, if you've got a very physical focused group, that's one concern, I suppose, is, you know, you could be running with like a mage, you know, whatever, an enhancement shaman, a mage, and a warlock, right? In a Mythic Plus group, let's say hypothetically, attack speed not that amazing for them. Like, it's okay, but like the mage and the warlock don't care. Whereas if you're running with a group that's like a rogue, a demon hunter, and a beastmaster hunter, maybe, you know, that group is going to be much more happy with attack speed. So There's definitely a question of utility there. I mean, in raid, it's probably fine. Like, it's affecting you and 4 allies, so the melee group is going to appreciate this. I think it's certainly an interesting option if you want to be that more supportive type warrior, though I do feel, again, as protection. Protection doesn't have the best crowd control abilities, so some of the extra ones that you can get with these Covenants are maybe a bit more appealing than Conqueror's Banner, at least in my opinion. The Soulbind Conduit for the Necrolords is the Veteran's Repute. This makes brandishing the Conqueror's Banner, immediately granting you 5 glory, and while the banner is planted, it increases your strength by 12%. So, like, yeah, this isn't too amazing for prot. Like, it's a bit more, it's a bit more damage, it's a bit more self-protection through Ignore Pain. It's only okay. This one definitely doesn't stand out as being all that great. That's much more there, I feel, for the DPS specs of the warrior. Then finally we have the Night Fae. Their signature ability is Soul Shape. Turn into a Vulpin, teleporting 15 yards forward and increasing your movement speed by 50%. You can reactivate Soul Shape every 4 seconds. It's called Flicker to redo that teleport. It lasts 12 seconds and it has a 1.5 minute cooldown. So yeah, there's a lot of mobility in this. Again, you potentially could do some interesting kiting stuff, which is kind of cool. I feel like the warrior is probably one of the most mobile tanks in the game, so it's not as crazy for you, but still a kind of a nifty thing that you could have some usage out of. And then the Covenant ability for warriors is called Ancient Aftershock. Unleash a wave of anima, doing 220% of attack power nature damage to up to 5 enemies, knocking them down for 1.5 seconds. Enemies struck take 42% attack power nature damage every 2 seconds for 12 seconds, and transfer it to you as 6 rage. It's instant cast with the 1.5 minute cooldown. So this one is really cool. Number 1, this does, again, an awful lot of damage. It does lots of damage, although a good chunk of the damage is in the 12-second dot form, so not as useful against short-living mobs, but against mobs that live that 12 seconds, that's going to do a lot of damage. It also generates lots of rage at a very steady rate. This can, it's 6 rage every 2 seconds against one mob. This can go up to, I believe, 180 rage total if you hit 5 enemies and the full dot goes off on them, which is a massive amount of rage, a massive amount of survivability. On top of that, the 1.5 second stun, that's really cool. It's like a super shockwave, basically. So it's certainly interesting for the prot warrior. You're going to have shockwave and ancient aftershock if you take this, so 2 AoE stuns in that cone attack. The thing to look out for is they're quite short duration stuns compared to, let's say, a leg sweep from a monk. Right, so and you are going to trigger diminishing returns between your shockwave and your ancient aftershock with multiple stuns, but nonetheless, I mean, it's another way to interrupt mobs in AoE. It's an AoE stop, which is pretty damn cool. And yeah, I don't know, I think this one is really appealing. This one seems really good. The Conduit just discover it very quickly, as well as Destructive Reverberations, which reduces Ancient Aftershock's cooldown by 15 seconds. And looks like that can scale up to about 30-second cooldown reduction, bringing it down to a 1-minute cooldown. So, I mean, to me, this is extremely appealing. I would say, I feel like, certainly as a Mythic Plus warrior, it's kind of an interesting choice, isn't it, between the Kyrian Spear of Bastion, which does upfront damage and gives you some upfront rage, and then will tether enemies to the spot. And it's also just as good in single target as it is in AoE. Or you can go for the Ancient Aftershock, which is going to give you another AoE stun instead of the tether effect of the spear. And it's going to give you absolutely tons of rage, but more so focused on AoE. It's not as good in single target, and it does have the longer cooldown. So it's an interesting choice in which one of those you prefer. Definitely, I'd say these two stand out to me. They stand out to me as a protection warrior, more so than the other ones. The Necrolord banner doesn't seem too appealing to me as a prot warrior, and Condemn seems actually pretty good as the Venthyr for really focusing on single target, although I do feel like as a tank you kind of care a bit more about AoE than single target. But yeah, some interesting choices for sure with the warrior Covenant abilities. Alright guys, well they are all the pieces of the Protection Warrior. How does it all come together? Is the Protection Warrior in Shadowlands any good? Is it any fun? Yeah, this is a tough question to answer, actually, to be honest with you. It's kind of tough. I feel like the Protection Warrior is a bit of a mixed bag. While most of it is pretty good, and you have some stuff that's absolutely amazing, there's also at the same time some stuff that's absolutely terrible. So it's kind of weird to get a proper feel for the class, in my opinion. let me cover the stuff that's terrible first. You know, we all love a good complaint, don't we? Isn't that a thing? All those videos, you know, negative videos and stuff get way more clicks and stuff on YouTube. I should be a complaining YouTuber. I'd be famous. It'd be great. But nah, a couple of problems with Protection Warrior. Again, I've already mentioned several times, I think, in the video, but coming from the live servers where you are Mythic plus Gods, all of that stuff really, across the board, has been nerfed coming into Shadowlands, so that will feel bad. But more importantly, I think it's, okay, let's just accept that Shadowlands is a different expansion. Well, how does the spec just feel, you know, from a new expansion, from start of expansion perspective? And while it mostly feels just fine, and like the rotation feels solid, and you've got a nice selection of defensive abilities, it feels good and complete. The one thing that definitely felt weak to me, that felt pretty anemic, was the AoE. The AoE now feels really anemic. It doesn't feel so good. Compared to the other tank classes I've played, it feels very underwhelming. Right? You've got Thunderclap, and you've got Revenge. So Revenge isn't proccing as often, so that's definitely a downside. And other than that, Revenge also has a really small range. It's a tiny, like, frontal cleave. And then you have Thunderclap. And like, I, for example, was trying to test out, like, the Menace talent, right, which is affecting your Intimidating Shout. But that sort of competes with Crackling Thunder, which is the talent that increases the radius of Thunderclap. Thunderclap definitely feels quite small. Like, your AoEs feel quite small compared to some of the other specs. And they also don't feel like they're doing that much damage, or that you have that much access to AoE. You know, certainly compared to the Protection Paladin, where you're flinging out Avenger shields left, right, and center. And of course, your Shield of the Righteous, you know, which is your core active mitigation. That's already, it's like Revenge, right? It does the frontal cleave just automatically. It's like if shield block automatically cleaved in front of you. Like, you just feel much more complete with your AoE there in Protection. On top of the other spells Protection have, which nearly universally are doing a bit of AoE damage, like Consecration and your spinny hammers and stuff like that. Or like even Vengeance Demon Hunter, which has its own problems for sure. Like Spirit Bomb, I think, is a big problem talent, but nonetheless, when you are running Spirit Bomb, you feel like you've got, again, a really good source of consistent AoE damage. It feels solid. Protection Warrior definitely felt weak in comparison to that. It felt underwhelming. And then the second big problem that I felt with Protection Warrior was that it really struggles when you're fighting enemies that are spread out, or like enemies that can dash around or split apart, stuff like that. It doesn't feel good there. It really doesn't. Because again, Thunderclap is a small radius without the talent. Revenge is a tiny radius. But like, yeah, with the other specs, like again, Protection Paladin, you can throw your shields. It's all good. Like, you are slow. You're an immobile class, but you do have that really strong thrown shield to interrupt mobs that are far away, to get good damage on them, get good aggro, and help them like run over to you and clump back up. That felt fine. For Vengeance Demon Hunter, I mean, the real strength of Vengeance is the utility. Like, you can jump around with your leaps, and you can throw down your sigils. You know, like Sigils of Chains, and your Fear Sigil, your Silent Sigil, and you can kind of control mobs and group them up that way, and it feels pretty good. I've been playing Brewmaster Monk, and you've got loads of AoE abilities. You know, your Keg Smashing, you've got your Rushing Jade Wind, you've Spinning Crane Kick, which you can spam as much as you want, really. Breath of Fire, they've got loads of tools. They've Ring of Peace, they can knock mobs in, and of course they can just roll around and Transcendence back and all that sort of stuff and pick up mobs all over the place. With the Prot Warrior, I definitely feel that it's pretty weak on that front. You know, like, you're good when stuff's clumped up, you can AoE them all right, reasonably well when they're clumped up, and you've got Shockwave, which is a frontal cone stun, or Intimidating Shout, which is again a short range AoE. Like that feels good when they're clumped up, but when they spread out, stuff falls apart relatively quickly. I feel it definitely falls apart relatively quickly, and definitely again I was running with the I was running with the Rumbling Earth, which was reducing the cooldown of Shockwave in most of the dungeons, which leaves you with Charge on a 20-second cooldown. And it leaves you with Heroic Leap on a 45-second cooldown. So yeah, it just, you know, whereas the other specs can kind of, like, Demon Hunter can jump around and Monks can roll around, it definitely felt way slower as the Warrior. Like, if there's two mobs hitting my team on the left, and then 20 yards away there's two mobs also casting spells at them on the right, I'm kind of sat there going, I feel like I can't really do much at all. Like, you feel really, really weak in that situation. So that's a really big downside, I feel. Just a little bit of lack of control in that AoE situations when stuff is spread out. So that is something to be concerned about, because that does matter, I feel, quite a bit for Mythic Plus, right? It's something to consider for sure. On the positive side, then, okay, I've complained a lot. Well, what is good? What are the good things? As I said, there were some really good things, and there are. Ravager, the talent is amazing, and this sort of fixes both of those problems to an extent, right? It does help fix them for sure. Ravager being that 45-second cooldown, throw down the spinning weapon, and it follows enemies, does an absolute ton of damage, and it gives you just a ton of rage as well. Oh, it's just amazing. What a great ability to play with. It really is a pleasure to play with. I mean, the downside is that, I mean, it is a talent, when talent should, in theory, be optional. So you shouldn't kind of be relying on a talent to really feel strong in those AoE situations. That doesn't seem quite right for a tank, in my opinion. But, I mean, if you do pick it, and I expect in most circumstances, it's looking likely that you will, it is going to feel really, really good. It's an awesome ability, so that's really nice. And the Covenant abilities for the Warrior as well. I think across all the classes, the Warrior has the best Covenant abilities. They are all amazing. You know, Spear of Bastion does an absolute ton of damage, and with the effectiveness of tethering enemies to the spot is super cool. You know, the Ancient Aftershock for the Night Fae, giving you, again, like another AoE frontal cone attack, but again, does tons of damage, generates tons of rage, and gives you another AoE stun, which is nice. The Necrolord banner, I think, is pretty cool as well. I mean, that was my personal least favorite one for Protection Warrior, but even then, it's still pretty cool. You know, when you're running with, let's say, a group in a dungeon, or you're with your team in a raid, like, especially in the dungeon where it buffs your whole dungeon group, it's gonna feel, I think, pretty awesome, you know, to pull a big pack, you know, and throw down that banner and be like, yes, I've given my team a ton of health, I've given them a ton of attack speed, they're gonna shred through this pack. You're gonna feel like you made a really sizable contribution. It's gonna feel awesome. And then, of course, Condemn for the Venthyr. Really flashy, making Execute a big part of your rotation. Actually, in fact, Execute, no matter what, Execute is a really welcome addition. I forgot to mention that already here, but that's a really positive perk. Like, you feel awesome in that single target damage position. Like, that feels really good. It's like, Revenge doesn't feel good. Revenge feels terrible as a rage dump. It feels terrible as a damage ability, in my opinion. Execute is incredible, though. It feels so much better. I'd rather press Execute every single time over Revenge, to be honest. But there is a downside, I suppose, to this, which is that, well, all of your abilities, your Covenant abilities, are so good as Warrior that you will be jealous of other Warriors, right? You will be jealous. You know, like, if you have Condemn, you're going to be jealous of that Spear of Bastion and the Ancient Aftershock. If you've got, you know, a Spear of Bastion, you might be jealous of the banner, maybe. Certainly you'll be jealous of Condemn Warriors. So, I mean, there's definitely that trade-off. You know, like when you're playing a class that has pretty terrible Covenant abilities, that, I mean, I guess one perk of that is that you don't really care if, you don't really care that you don't have the other ones because they're pretty meh anyway, right? Definitely Warrior is the opposite problem, though. You kind of want all of them because they're all so damn good. Oh, actually, one other thing. I would have totally forgot to point this out, but one other thing that definitely really bothered me on the Prot Warrior, and this bothered me on the Prot Paladin a bit as well, was some sort of inconsistencies I felt with the GCDs. Like, I know GCD is a big topic, right? That's a big issue for a lot of players, are very unhappy with some of the GCD stuff. It doesn't bother me as much as it bothers most people, but it did bother me in the Prot Warrior. Revenge was the first one. Revenge being on GCD just felt wrong to me. And I think the reason is that it is a rage spender, and shield block and ignore pain, your other rage spenders, they're off the GCD. You can press them whenever you want to. And it just felt very inconsistent. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel right for me that two of my rage spenders are off GCD, but one isn't. It didn't flow. It was clunky. It was clunky. Also, defensive cooldowns have a similar issue where you have Spell Reflection, Demoralizing Shout, Last Stand, and Shield Wall. And three of those, Spell Reflection, Last Stand, Shield Wall, they are all off the GCD, right? Demoralizing Shout, though, is on the GCD. And again, it just feels wrong. Like, why is it on the GCD? It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it's a defensive ability, exactly like the other ones. There's nothing, you know, nothing tangibly different about it that would make sense for it to be on the GCD while the others aren't. It's just kind of weird. And again, that just feels really clunky. Whenever you press the button, it feels wrong. It just feels wrong. Like, I would honestly, I could live with it if they were all on the GCD. I'd obviously much prefer if they were all off the GCD. I think that makes by far the most sense for, you know, tank defensive abilities. But it's so strange to have 4 defensive abilities, defensive cooldowns, and 3 of them are off GCD, and then 1 randomly for no good reason whatsoever isn't. It's just, yeah, it's just bizarre. And especially because it's a 45-second cooldown. You know, you don't press it as like, Spell Reflect is 25-second cooldown. It's off the GCD. So the GCD thing isn't there because of the cooldown, not at all. It's just weird. It just, you know, you're pressing that button very frequently, and every single time it doesn't feel right. You're like, wait, something is slightly broken here with this spec. What's going on? So that's definitely a problem. But yeah, I don't know. All that stuff being said, I've probably given out about the warrior a lot, but I think generally speaking, if you're going to be maining the prot warrior, I think you will mostly probably be pretty fine and feel pretty okay. We'll see what happens when it comes to tuning, how they actually fare up in that AoE stuff. Like I said, right now, AoE definitely seems like a bit of a problem issue for warrior. It definitely seems like a bit of a problem issue. Hopefully they will, like, you know, they can tune up Thunderclap and stuff like that if it is too underwhelming. Certainly, I definitely think the weakness of the spec is going to be when mobs are spread out. You just don't have many tools to answer that, so that is going to be one of your weaknesses in Mythic Plus. But, you know, it's okay for specs to have some weaknesses. I think that's relatively okay. You know, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. And I do think that the prot warrior plays fairly well overall. If, you know, it kind of does what a warrior is supposed to do. It's, you know, it's straightforward. Yeah, it's straightforward in what it does. It's a straightforward tank. It defends the way you think a tank should. It's got, you know, nice defensives that match what a tank should have. Yeah, it just kind of all, it meshes together pretty well. So yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be rushing out to play this one myself. I had probably a bit more fun, like on the other tanks maybe, but it's a decent one. It's solid. It does the job. And yeah, that is the Protection Warrior. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope that you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
My blades will rend your flesh. No target has escaped me. Soon all of Maldraxxus will join you.